In the heart of Montana, a weary veteran inherited a forgotten farm and a loyal dog as his only companion. But when a mysterious company came for what lay beneath the soil, he uncovered a secret his grandfather had buried decades ago, one that would change the fate of an entire valley. This is not just a story about land and water. It's about memory, sacrifice, and the kind of love that refuses to fade, even when everyone else has forgotten. Please support us by subscribing to the channel to follow this emotional journey. The wind rolled across the plains of Sweetgrass County like a whisper from the past, carrying the smell of soil, dry hay, and rain that never came. The Carter farm sat quiet on the ridge, its barns gray and hollow, as though holding its breath since old C.S. Carter passed away. Eli Carter stood at the gate that morning, his boots sinking slightly in the soft earth. He was 40 now, with shoulders hardened by military years and eyes that had seen too many horizons through desert dust. His beard carried threads of gray that hadn't been there before Afghanistan. And though he was back in Montana, back to where his blood began, the land felt like foreign ground. Beside him trotted Boone, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat and intelligent amber eyes. Boone was steady and quiet, a military rescue dog retired from service just as Eli was. They shared the same stillness, the kind that comes from having both given too much and survived it. Inside the farmhouse, the air smelled of varnish, old paper, and memories that refused to fade. On the kitchen table sat a single envelope, sealed with wax and marked in his grandfather's uneven handwriting. For Eli. The lawyer, Mr. Dorsey, a thin man in his 60s with hair like snow and eyes that had seen too many wills, cleared his throat. "Your grandfather didn't leave much in words," he said, pushing the envelope forward. "Just this, and the property, of course. The rest, he said you'd understand." Eli nodded, though he wasn't sure he did. His hands, still rough from mechanical work at the base, broke the seal. Inside was a small brass key and a folded slip of paper. On it, in fading ink, were 5 words: "Don't plow where the heart rests." He frowned. "Is that it?" Mr. Dorsey shrugged gently. "That's all he left for you, son. But knowing Silas, that's likely more than it seems." Eli pocketed the key. Outside, Boone barked once, sharply, the kind of bark that said he'd found something unusual. I stepped out to find the dog pawing at the dry ground near the old barn. The barn itself leaned slightly to the east, its wood weathered to silver, its tin roof rattling in the wind. Eli pushed the doors open. The smell of oil and hay hit him like a memory. Inside were the relics of another era: tools wrapped in dust, a rusted milk can, an old Ford tractor that hadn't moved in decades. And then, in the corner, beneath a heavy tarp, he saw it: the old John Deere 1940 plow. Its green faded to olive, the leather seat cracked and brittle. He remembered sitting there as a boy, watching Silas drive slow circles across the field, teaching him that patience was more powerful than muscle. Boone sniffed the seat, then gave a short, low whine. Eli brushed the dust away. And there it was, beneath the leather seat cushion, a narrow slit in the metal frame. He took out the small brass key. It fit perfectly. With a faint click, the compartment opened. Inside lay a small, oiled cloth bundle. Eli unwrapped it carefully, revealing a notebook, its pages yellowed and bound in fading green leather. The first page read, "Farm Records, 1948-1978, SC." Eli turned the pages slowly. Each was filled with Silas's neat handwriting. Rainfall patterns, soil conditions, crop rotations, and short personal notes like prayers to the earth. Corn weak near West Ridge, soil tired. And then, near the back, something different. A hand-drawn map of the property marked with faint blue lines. Beneath it, a note read, "Natural aquifer beneath North Ridge. Do not drill. Do not disturb." Eli sat down on an overturned crate, heart thudding. He remembered his grandfather's strange insistence decades ago to never plow beyond the North Ridge, no matter how good the soil looked. "Some places aren't meant to be broken," Silas had said. Now, the cryptic line, "Don't plow where the heart rests," made sense. The heart wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. The heart of the land. Its water. He turned to the final page. The ink was shakier, the handwriting older. "The land provides, but only if we protect it." A chill passed through him, though the air was still. Boone pressed his head against Eli's knee, sensing the unease that crept through his bones. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of an engine. Maybe a truck down on the county road. The world beyond this farm was already moving, already hungry. Eli looked out across the fields, 300 acres of legacy and mystery, and felt the burden settle quietly on his shoulders. He wasn't sure what Silas had meant to leave him, but it was more than just dirt and fences. It was a secret and a warning. That night, as the sun went down over the plains, Eli sat on the porch with Boone lying at his feet. The fields shimmered gold beneath the dying light. Somewhere in that land was the truth his grandfather had hidden, a truth buried under decades of dust, waiting for the right hands to find it again. And Eli, though weary and uncertain, realized that the key in his pocket might unlock more than just a compartment. It might open a history he wasn't ready to inherit, and a fight he hadn't known was coming. The next morning broke with a pale sun and a silence that felt watchful. A layer of frost glazed the grass, and when Eli stepped off the porch, it cracked softly under his boots. Boone trotted ahead, his breath steaming in the cold. The night had left him restless. The words from Silas's note, "Don't plow where the heart rests," had replayed in his mind until sleep became useless. Now, as dawn bled into the valley, he decided he needed answers. He started the old Ford pickup, its engine coughing awake like a man roused too early. The road into town wound through the same hills Silas had once called the ribs of God. Every turn brought back pieces of his boyhood, a rusted mailbox, the stump of the old windmill, the faded sign reading "Welcome to Sweetgrass County." Boone's head hung out the window, ears twitching. Dogs, Eli thought, always know what's worth smelling. The Sweetgrass County Records Office was a squat brick building with an American flag that had forgotten how to wave. Inside, the air smelled of paper, coffee, and slow time. Behind the counter sat Martha Dyer, a woman in her late 50s with salt and pepper hair and glasses perched low on her nose. "Morning," she said, looking up briefly. "Help you with something?" Eli introduced himself and mentioned his grandfather's name. Her expression softened immediately. "Silas Carter," she repeated. "He used to bring in handwritten ledgers every spring just to prove his taxes fair. Never trusted computers." Eli smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." He leaned forward. "I'm looking for any records tied to a water covenant. Maybe from 1978. My grandfather might have signed something with the county." Martha typed on an old keyboard, its keys clicking like typewriter hammers. "Let's see. Carter. Silas. She squinted at the monitor. "There's a digital copy of something labeled Conservation Agreement SH72A, but," she frowned, "there's no scan, just a note that the original was never archived." "Never archived?" She shrugged. "Or misplaced. Depends on who you ask. That was the year the county switched storage systems. Half the old contracts went missing." Eli folded his arms. "You wouldn't happen to know who was commissioner back then, would you?" "Still is," she said with a thin smile. "Frank Holloway, Rick's father, owns the firehouse now." Before Eli could ask more, the front door opened with a metallic chime. A man in a dark jacket stepped in, tall, lean, and smiling, with the easy confidence of someone used to being welcomed everywhere. "Excuse me," he said smoothly, glancing between them. "I'm looking for Mr. Carter." Eli turned. "That's me." The man extended his hand. "Jack Burke. Burke Energy." He said it like the name alone explained everything. Eli didn't take the hand. "What can I do for you, Mr. Burke?" Burke smiled, unfazed. "We've been surveying land out by the Sweetgrass Ridge. Perfect corridor for wind energy. Your property sits right in the middle of the airflow data. I wanted to discuss a possible partnership. A lease, maybe. Clean energy, good for the community." Eli studied him. The man was mid-50s, hair silver at the temples, wearing a jacket too fine for Montana mud. His handshake, when Eli finally took it, was dry, firm, and practiced. "I just buried my grandfather," Eli said flatly. "I'm not selling anything." "Of course," Burke replied, voice smooth as polished oak. "But it never hurts to talk. Sometimes what looks like an old farm can power an entire county." He left a glossy business card on the counter and tipped his head politely to Martha before walking out. Martha watched through the window. "That man's been circling half this town," she muttered, "promising jobs, new turbines, and tax cuts. Folks here have heard that song before." Back at the farm, clouds gathered low, dragging their shadows across the fields. Boone barked once and ran toward the north fence where the grass grew taller and the soil darker. "What is it, boy?" Eli followed. Boone stopped near a thin pole sticking out of the ground, a red ribbon fluttering from its top. It wasn't there yesterday. Eli crouched and brushed away dirt. Buried just beneath was a small black device, no bigger than a thermos, wired to a metal rod. He lifted it carefully. A logo gleamed faintly through the mud. Burke Energy. It wasn't a wind sensor. Eli recognized the design from his service days. It was a seismic detector, the kind used for oil exploration. Boone growled, low and steady. Eli turned the device in his hands. Someone had been on his land without permission. Someone had planted this. And if Burke's company was probing for oil, then his talk about wind turbines was nothing but cover. He took the device inside and placed it on the kitchen table beside the old notebook. The two objects, one of honest work, one of deceit, stared back at each other like past and present in a silent argument. He opened Silas's ledger again, rereading the map of the North Ridge. There, faint but visible, was a circular mark drawn around the same area where Boone had found the pole. In the margin, Silas had written, "Protect this ground. It feeds more than crops." Eli rubbed his temples. He felt like a man standing at the mouth of a storm no one else could see. As night fell, the lights of town flickered faintly across the valley. From the porch, Eli could see the reflection of headlights far off on the ridge, moving slowly, stopping, then vanishing. He switched off his porch light and watched. Boone sat beside him, ears forward. "Still think they're just after wind?" Eli muttered. The dog's only answer was a quiet rumble in his throat. Eli's mind drifted to his grandfather again, the stubborn old man who refused to let developers touch the North Field. "Some things you protect even when they stop thanking you for it," Silas had once said. Eli looked toward the field, its shape ghostly under the moonlight. The brass key still sat on the table inside, beside the ledger. It didn't unlock any door he knew of yet, but he had the feeling it soon would. The night deepened. The wind carried a distant hum, mechanical, hollow, the sound of something being drilled, maybe miles away, but closing in. Boone stood, fur bristling. "Yeah," Eli whispered. "I hear it too." He went back inside, turned off the lamp, and laid the old key on his palm. It gleamed faintly, as if remembering its purpose. Tomorrow, he decided, he would go back to the county office. He would find out what SH-72A meant, and why his grandfather had protected this land as if guarding a living heart. The wind came early that morning, rattling the old window panes and carrying the faint scent of burned diesel from somewhere down the valley. Eli stepped outside with a mug of black coffee, the kind that could wake a corpse. Boone padded behind him, tail low, nose working the air. The north field lay still under a low gray sky. Frost shimmered on the stalks of wild grass, and far beyond, the sweetgrass ridge stood like the folded knuckles of an ancient hand. That was where Boone had found the buried censer the day before. And that was where Eli's thoughts kept circling back, like crows unwilling to leave a carcass alone. He'd barely taken a sip when Boone gave a short, warning bark. A white truck had pulled up near the fence line, its doors marked with EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. A tall woman stepped out, clipboard in hand. She was in her mid-30s, long auburn hair tied in a braid, sharp cheekbones, and skin weathered just enough to tell she spent more time outdoors than behind a desk. Her eyes, gray-green like thawing ice, took in the property with calm, professional precision. "Mr. Carter?" she called. Eli set down his cup. "That's me." She crossed the field with quick, sure steps, boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. "Clara Reynolds, Environmental Protection Agency. I'm investigating reports of unauthorized geological surveying in this area." She extended her badge, her voice measured but not cold. Eli frowned. "EPA? You folks don't usually drive out this far unless something's wrong." Clara gave a half smile. "Something is. Someone filed a complaint, anonymous, about possible environmental violations tied to a private energy company. You wouldn't happen to know anyone from Burke Energy, would you?" Eli chuckled without humor. "He came to my door yesterday, said he wanted to build wind turbines." She nodded slowly. "Burke Energy has a history. They were fined in North Dakota 2 years ago for falsifying clean energy permits. Same playbook. Fake turbine project, real drilling underneath. We've been tracking them." She knelt beside the fence post, brushing away frost to reveal another half-buried censer, smaller this time, disguised with soil and dry grass. "They're using seismic readers. This isn't about wind." Eli folded his arms. "So they're after oil." or water, she said softly, whatever's under your feet. Sweetgrass Ridge sits on the county's main aquifer. It supplies 3 towns, including this one. Eli stared at her. You're telling me my grandfather's land is sitting on the only thing keeping this place alive? Clara looked up at him. Yes, and if they drill here, they'll crack the aquifer. You'll have oil in the wells within a month. Boone growled quietly, circling near the post, ears flat. Clara glanced at him and smiled faintly. Good instincts. He can probably smell the chemical. Residues on the equipment. Eli knelt beside Boone and ran a hand down the dog's back. He's been through a war or two. Doesn't trust quiet men in clean boots. That earned a small laugh from her. Neither do I. They spent the next 2 hours walking the fence line together, marking where the sensors were hidden. Clara photographed everything, tagging coordinates on her tablet. The air stayed cold and metallic, the sky too bright to feel safe. When they finished, she turned to him. These devices are illegal without property consent. If we can prove they belong to Burke Energy, that's a federal violation. Proof won't mean much if they've already mapped the place, Eli said. Clara's expression hardened. Then we stop them before they act. She looked toward the North Ridge. Your grandfather, Silas Carter, right? He signed a water covenant in 1978, according to our federal database. I found the record number, but the original file is missing from the county archives. Eli nodded slowly. I heard that yesterday from the records office. You think that's connected? I know it is. She pulled a folded printout from her jacket and handed it to him. It was a faded topographic map marked with a single notation, SH-72A, Protected Recharge Zone. That's the code for Silas's covenant, she said. This field, Heartland Field, I think your family called it, sits right on top of it. Eli stared at the map. He never told anyone. He just said not to plow this patch. Smart man, Clara murmured. Some folks protect land by fencing it. Others do it by keeping quiet. They returned to the porch. Boone sprawled at Clara's feet as if deciding she'd earned his approval. The woman scratched behind his ear absent-mindedly. Do you live out here alone? She asked. Eli nodded. Wasn't planning on staying long, but now, he trailed off, glancing toward the distant ridge. Looks like the land had other plans. Clara smiled faintly. It usually does. Then her tone shifted. Listen, Eli, Burke Energy operates fast. Once they think a property's vulnerable, they move equipment in under temporary state permits. It's the old ask forgiveness, not permission trick. If they think you're just one man, they'll try to scare you out. Eli's eyes hardened. They can try. You sound like your grandfather, she said, standing. I read part of his covenant in a federal backup file. He wrote a line I liked. We guard what gives us breath, not what gives us profit. Not many men write like that anymore. He looked down at the worn ledger on the table beside him, Silas's handwriting looping across yellow pages. No, not many. Clara handed him her card. If you see anything suspicious, trucks, strange lights, heavy equipment, call me directly. I'll file for a temporary injunction to stall there. Permits. Eli took the card, then hesitated. Why do you care so much, Agent Reynolds? This can't just be about a water table. Her eyes softened, but her jaw stayed firm. Because my father was a driller in North Dakota. He worked for Burke's first company. When the aquifer collapsed, our town's wells ran black. I was 16. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft wind whispering through the cottonwoods. As she drove away, Boone barked once, a sharp farewell kind of sound. Eli watched the EPA truck shrink along the dirt road until it disappeared behind the ridge. When the quiet returned, it felt heavier than before. He walked to the edge of Heartland Field and looked down at the soil, still frosted, hiding everything that mattered. Somewhere beneath, the water ran, unseen, ancient, alive. Boone trotted beside him, nose twitching. Eli knelt, running his hand through the cold dirt. "You were right, old man," he whispered to the wind. "The heart of the land's under here." As he stood, headlights flickered on the horizon. Two beams cutting through the dusk, stopping near the same fence post Clara had inspected. Then another pair joined it. Boone's growl rose low and steady. Eli narrowed his eyes, every soldier's instinct wakened in his bones. Whoever they weren't here to talk. He reached for the rifle mounted behind the kitchen door. The same one his grandfather had kept clean but ready. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant engines. The war, it seemed, had come home again. Night fell thick over the valley, a curtain of ink pulled across the sky. The Carter farm sat wrapped in that uneasy quiet that always comes before something breaks. Eli sat at the kitchen table, the single lamp casting a soft halo across Silas's old ledger. Boone lay nearby, head resting on his paws but eyes half open. The lightest sound would bring him up. The brass key gleamed faintly beside the cup of cold coffee. He flipped through the pages again, tracing the penciled lines of the water veins beneath Heartland Field. The more he looked, the more he saw the pattern. Silas had mapped the aquifer like a living body, each note written with the devotion of a man protecting a pulse. "Protect its veins," Eli murmured under his breath. Outside, the wind changed direction. The smell of something sharp and unnatural crept in through the cracks. Gasoline. Boone's head shot up, ears rigid. Eli rose fast. He stepped onto the porch. The night was too still, too dark. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement near the barn. A faint orange shimmer licked along the ground like a snake made of fire. "Boone!" The dog bolted ahead as Eli sprinted after him. The barn door stood ajar, and light, no flame, was blooming from inside. Eli grabbed the handle, but it was already hot. He threw his shoulder into the door, coughing as smoke clawed its way out. Inside, the air boiled with heat. The dry hay crackled like bones. The wooden rafters screamed. Through the haze, he saw the old tractor, the John Deere, framed in a halo of orange, the tarps catching one by one. The notebook, the envelope. He'd left copies of Silas's papers on the workbench earlier that evening. He pulled his shirt over his mouth and forced his way in. The smoke burned his throat, made every breath feel like swallowing glass. Boone barked outside, frantic, circling the structure. Eli reached the bench, snatched the folder of carbon copies and the brass key, and turned just as the roof began to groan. A beam gave way with a sharp crack. He dove sideways, rolling across the dirt floor, shielding the papers with his body. Something hit his shoulder, a heavy plank. Pain shot through him, hot and immediate. Boone lunged through the doorway, teeth clamped around the back of Eli's jacket, dragging him toward the exit. Together, they burst out into the night just as the roof caved in with a thunderous roar. Sparks exploded upward, swallowed by the black sky. Eli lay on the frozen grass, coughing hard, one arm wrapped protectively around the papers. Boone stood over him, chest heaving, eyes wide but alert. When the first volunteer fire truck arrived, red lights strobing against the trees, the barn was already beyond saving. Rick Holloway, the local fire chief, broad-shouldered, red-bearded, and wearing the kind of calm only men who've seen chaos can hold, knelt beside him. "You all right, Carter?" "I've been better," Eli rasped. Rick glanced toward the blaze. "Looks like arson. You store fuel in there?" "Only a few cans for the tractor. Those went up too clean," Rick muttered. "Gasoline poured. Maybe diesel mixed in. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Eli's jaw tightened. "You think it's connected to Burke?" Rick looked at him for a long moment, then exhaled. "You didn't hear that from me." Behind them, Boone paced in tight circles, the orange light flickering off his fur like embers dancing on water. By dawn, the barn was nothing but a skeleton, black ribs against a pink morning. Clara arrived in her EPA truck, mud splattered up to the doors. Her braid was loose, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "What happened?" she asked, stepping over the charred threshold. "Somebody wanted my grandfather's work gone," Eli said quietly. "They almost succeeded." She crouched, running a gloved hand through the ash. "Accelerant," she murmured. "You were lucky." He glanced at Boone. "Luck had teeth last night." She smiled faintly, then stood. "I've seen this before, Eli. Burke's men burn what they can't buy. They'll file claims, force permits, scare off holdouts. It's what they do." Eli crossed his arms, the smoke-stained papers still tucked under his jacket. "Then we stopped them." Her gaze held his. "I can open an investigation, but the county owns jurisdiction. If you want it done right, you'll need to bring them proof. Real proof." He nodded. "Then I'll get it." She hesitated. "How?" Eli looked out toward the fields where the frost had already melted away. "The same way we did overseas. Eyes open, no sleep, and a plan." That night, while the rest of the valley slept, Eli sat on the porch steps, rifle across his knees. Boone lay beside him, ears flicking at every sound. The stars hung sharp and close, like nails hammered into dark wood. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a truck engine rumbled faintly, fading into silence. Eli felt the ache in his shoulder where the beam had hit, the burn in his lungs where smoke had clawed its way in. But beneath all that pain, something else had woken. An old soldier's steadiness. He thought of Silas, of Clara's determined eyes, of the map that showed a heart beating beneath the soil. If they want to fight, he thought, then they'll have to dig through hell to find it. Boone raised his head, gaze following Eli's toward the barn's ruins. "We'll rebuild it," Eli said softly. "But first, we find what they're hiding." The dog gave a low bark, short and certain, as if swearing in agreement. A few days later, the insurance inspector came and went. The official report said electrical fault. Clara wasn't convinced, and neither was Eli. At sunset, she met him again at the property line, papers in hand. "I checked the company's permit requests," she said. "Burke Energy filed 3 new ones this week, all in the Sweetgrass Basin, none with your name." "So they're surrounding us," Eli said. "Exactly." She looked at the horizon, the faint silhouettes of drilling towers catching the light far away. "You'll need evidence strong enough for court. surveillance, serial numbers, something they can't deny. Eli nodded slowly. Then we'll start watching. Every night. Clara hesitated, studying him. You're not just doing this for your land, are you? He met her gaze. No, for his name. She smiled sadly. Silas would be proud. Later that night, Eli walked back to what remained of the barn. The ashes still smelled of fuel and old wood. He kicked through the debris until his boot struck metal. A warped horseshoe, half buried but still whole. He picked it up and brushed it clean. The old iron was warm from the sun, its curve smooth where Silas's hands must have held it long ago. He hung it above the front door where the first one had been. Boone watched, tail swaying once, slowly. In the distance, thunder rolled, but it wasn't the sky. It was engines, trucks moving in the dark. Eli's jaw set. They're coming back. Boone's growl rose low, the kind that comes before the storm breaks. This time, Eli didn't feel fear, only purpose. The ruins of the barn smoked for 2 more days. Every gust of wind stirred up black flakes that clung to Eli's boots like the remnants of a bad dream. The air still carried that bitter tang of burned diesel and iron, and the silence afterward was so complete it hurt to stand in it. He spent the morning rebuilding what little he could, stacking half-burned lumber, salvaging nails, sifting through the ash for anything that had a shape worth keeping. Boone stayed close, moving slow, his fur still smelling faintly of smoke. When Eli reached the far wall, he stopped. There, beneath a half-charred beam, something caught the light. A small brass hinge, half melted but still fastened to a scrap of wood. He pried it free and turned it in his hand. It was the edge of the sign that had once hung above the barn door. Heartland Field. He held it a moment, thumb tracing the burned letters. Guess the land's got more fight than they think, he murmured. Boone wagged his tail once as if agreeing. By noon, Clara's truck rolled up the drive again, throwing dust in soft spirals. She climbed out, her face pale from exhaustion and coffee, and held out a folder. I found something, she said, stepping around the debris. In the county's old archives. Look at this. Inside the folder was a photocopy of a yellowed report. At the top, Conservation Covenant SH-72A, Silas Carter, 1978. But the rest was strange. Half of it blacked out with heavy ink, and in the margin, someone had scribbled a faint code. See Federal Registry, Ref. number 72AHS. What's this? Eli asked. Clara's voice dropped. It's a cross-reference to a federal hydrology record. The signature on the file matches your grandfather's handwriting. She hesitated. There's more. The system log says the original physical copy was withdrawn by someone from the county office about 20 years ago. Name, Frank Holloway. Eli frowned. Rick's father? She nodded. He was county commissioner at the time, and guess who funded his campaign? He didn't have to guess. They drove to the Sweetgrass County Storage Facility, a squat building that looked more like a forgotten warehouse than an archive. Inside, rows of gray cabinets stretched into shadow. Dust lay thick as snow. The clerk at the desk, a teenager with headphones and no sense of curiosity, waved them through with barely a glance. Records Room B, 3rd row, hydrology files. Don't get lost. It's haunted, he said without looking up. Perfect, Eli muttered. Clara smiled thinly. I've seen worse ghosts. They moved through the rows, the sound of their boots muffled by years of dust. Clara carried a flashlight. its beam slicing through the gloom. She stopped at a cabinet marked 1970 to 1980 water agreements. "Here," she said. The drawers groaned when she pulled them open. Inside were thousands of folders, their tabs curling like old leaves. She flipped through quickly. Carter, Carter, and then got it. But when she opened the folder, it was empty. A single slip of paper rested inside. A handwritten note. "See Storage Unit Number 14, SH-72A, Secured Materials." "Locked storage," Clara whispered. "That's federal level. These are usually sealed with physical tags, not digital ones." Eli looked around. At the far end of the aisle, a small metal door stood behind a chain-link gate. A faded label above it read, "Unit 14, Restricted." He walked over, gripping the bars. The padlock was old, heavy, and rusted. Boone sniffed at it, tail twitching. Eli smiled grimly. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Clara tilted her head. "If you're thinking we're not waiting for a warrant, then yes." She took a lockpick from her jacket, not exactly standard EPA issue. "Old habit," she said. "Used to help my dad with padlocks when we get trapped in tool sheds." The lock clicked open with surprising ease. Inside was a single wooden crate, nailed shut, coated in a layer of dust. The stenciled letters barely showed through. SC, Sweetgrass, 1978. Eli pried the lid off with a crowbar. Inside lay a wax-sealed envelope, brittle but intact, stamped with the county seal. Beneath it, a folded letter, written in the familiar looping hand of Silas Carter. Eli unfolded it carefully. The paper trembled in his hands, though his grip did not. "One day, someone will come wanting what runs beneath. If you love this land, protect its veins. The water gives us life, and greed will try to drain it dry. Don't sell it, don't fence it, don't let them make it theirs. The heart of Sweetgrass is buried here. Keep it beatin'. Silas Carter." For a moment, no one spoke. The warehouse seemed to listen with them. Clara finally said softly, "He knew they'd come back someday." Eli nodded. "And now they have. They photographed everything. The letter, the seal, the crate, and replaced it exactly as they'd found it. Outside, the afternoon light was thin and cold. Clara leaned against her truck, rubbing her eyes. "If we can verify this covenant with the EPA seal, we can block Burke Energy at the federal level. But we'll need a clean scan of the signature, the seal, and the water coordinates. Do you have anything from your grandfather's records that matches?" Eli thought for a long moment. Then he looked toward the burned hill where the barn had stood. "Maybe." They drove back to the farm. The ashes still smoked faintly. He went to the western wall, the one that had somehow survived the fire, and stared at the charred wood. Something about it felt wrong, uneven. He grabbed a hammer and pried at the planks. One by one, the boards came loose, revealing a thin cavity behind. Inside was a small, sealed wooden box wrapped in cloth and wax. He pulled it out, setting it gently on the ground. Boone sniffed it once, then backed away as if he understood what it was. Eli cut the wax with his knife. Inside were two items: a faded original copy of the 1978 Water Covenant, bearing both Silas's signature and the county seal, and a small leather-bound notebook marked SH-72A. The covenant was still legible. It declared the land of Heartland Field a protected recharge zone, restricting any drilling or commercial use that may endanger the hydrological integrity of Sweetgrass Aquifer. And below the final signature, in his grandfather's trembling hand, was written one more line: "For Eli, when the time comes." Clara knelt beside him, eyes wide. "Eli, this is it. This is the proof." He exhaled slowly, the weight of decades settling on his shoulders like rain. "He knew I'd need it." She nodded. "And he trusted you to finish what he started." Eli closed the covenant gently, the paper whispering like breath. "Then that's what we'll do." Boone barked once, sharp and sure, as if confirming the decision. Eli looked up at the horizon, the line of distant hills now shadowed by gathering clouds. It wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, he had something solid, not just memory or faith, but proof. The fire had taken the barn, but it hadn't taken the heart. And now the land had given back its secret. The morning of the hearing dawned brittle and pale, the kind of light that makes every shadow honest. Frost glazed the fields, and Boone's paw prints stretched behind Eli like a trail of quiet faith. The rebuilt sign, Heartland Field, gleamed faintly above the porch, the letters hand-carved from salvaged wood. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked like a countdown. Clara poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs, her face drawn but steady. "You ready?" she asked. Eli adjusted his jacket, the folder of evidence under his arm. "I've been ready since the night they burned the barn." Boone sat by the door, tail thumping once, not eager but resolute. They drove into town in silence, the truck rattling over the frozen gravel road. The courthouse came into view, an old red-brick building that had seen too many arguments and not enough justice. Its flag hung limp in the cold wind. Inside, the Sweetgrass County courtroom buzzed like a hive before a storm. Farmers, townsfolk, reporters, even a few men in suits, everyone had come to watch the showdown. At the front sat Judge Mary Ann O'Donnell, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, a woman who looked like she'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains. She was known across 3 counties as Iron Mary, fair but never gentle. At the opposite table, Jack Burke sat surrounded by lawyers in gray suits. He looked immaculate. Dark suit, polished boots, a smile that could sell snow to the Arctic. When he caught Eli's eye, he gave a small nod that managed to be both polite and smug. Eli took his seat beside Clara, and the box of evidence on the table between them. Boone waited outside the courtroom, under orders to stay, though his soft whining could almost be heard through the doors. Judge O'Donnell's gavel came down. "This hearing is now in session. Case number 42C, Burke Energy versus Carter Estate." Her gaze swept the room. "Mr. Burke, your petition seeks authorization to explore and extract subterranean resources on the Carter property for public energy development. Is that correct?" Burke rose smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. Our company's goal is to harness local energy potential for jobs, infrastructure, and growth. This project will benefit the entire county." His voice was honey on glass. Judge O'Donnell turned to Eli. "Mr. Carter, you are the inheritor of this land. Do you contest?" Eli stood, shoulders square. "I do, Your Honor." "On what grounds?" He placed Silas's covenant on the table, its wax seal cracked but still visible. "On the grounds that this land isn't theirs to take. It's protected by my grandfather's signature and by law." The judge nodded. Proceed." Clara rose, professional but burning inside. "Your Honor, this is the original 1978 Water Conservation Covenant, signed by Silas Carter and ratified by Sweetgrass County. The covenant designates Heartland Field as a protected recharge zone feeding the Sweetgrass Aquifer, the main source of water for 3 townships." She held up a document sealed in plastic. "This is the county's official registry copy, retrieved from Storage Unit 14. It bears the original Hydrological Survey Code SH72A. Murmurs rippled through the room. One of Burke's lawyers stood. "Objection. Chain of custody for this document is unclear. Anyone could have planted it." Clara didn't flinch. "Chain of custody can be verified through federal hydrology logs in the EPA backup archive. You'll find that the signature and seal match perfectly with the 1978 records." The judge lifted an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Clara Reynolds, Environmental Protection Agency." That title landed like a hammer. The courtroom went still. Burke's smile faltered for the first time. When it was his turn, Burke tried to regain control. He gestured to a screen where his team displayed sleek diagrams, wind farm blueprints, all glossy colors and curved lines. "Sweetgrass County needs energy independence," he said earnestly. "My company is offering progress, green energy, sustainable development, and hundreds of jobs." Eli stood. "You're lying." Gasps fluttered through the crowd. The judge's gavel tapped once, but softly. "Explain, Mr. Carter." Eli reached into the box and pulled out a mud-caked black cylinder, the buried seismic sensor Boone had found. "This isn't a wind sensor. It's a seismic reader, military grade, used for oil and gas prospecting." He set it on the table with a thud. "We found 3 of these on my property. None of them disclosed under your so-called clean energy permits." Clara added quietly, "EPA analysis confirms trace petroleum compounds in the soil where these were buried. They weren't mapping wind, they were mapping oil." A murmur swelled again, angrier this time. The tension broke when the side doors opened. Sheriff Rick Holloway entered, hat in hand, expression grave. He walked straight to the judge and handed over a folder. "Your Honor," he said, "my deputies found these early this morning behind Sweetgrass Ridge, unregistered oil drums buried under a tarp. Serial numbers traced back to Burke Energy Logistics." Judge O'Donnell flipped through the photos inside the folder. The color drained from Burke's face. Eli's heart pounded. He didn't need to look. He already knew who had led them there. Boone. It had happened hours before the hearing, before sunrise. Boone had slipped out, nose low to the ground, following a scent Eli couldn't smell. Oil, maybe, or deceit. Eli followed, flashlight cutting through the cold dark. When Boone stopped, he began digging near a patch of disturbed earth. The metal clang came after only a few minutes. Buried barrels, marked faintly with Burke's logo. Eli had called Rick right then. He didn't know if the sheriff would believe him, but he'd come. Now, in the courtroom, that truth stood taller than any lawyer's speech. Judge O'Donnell looked up, her voice calm but sharp as winter steel. "Mr. Burke, I believe we've seen enough." Burke's attorney began to protest, but the gavel struck again, this time like a gunshot. "The court finds that the Carter property, and specifically the area known as Heartland Field, is under legal environmental protection per the 1978 Covenant. All permits issued to Burke Energy are hereby revoked pending federal review. Furthermore, Due to evidence of unauthorized drilling activity, a full investigation into Burke Energy's operations in Sweetgrass County will begin immediately. The room erupted. Some clapped. Some just sighed. Relief, justice, disbelief, all tangled together. Eli stood still, the noise falling away. The tension that had lived inside him for months loosened like a knot finally undone. Clara turned to him, smiling through the exhaustion. "You did it." He shook his head. "We did it. And Boone." Outside, through the courthouse doors, Eli could see Boone waiting, head tilted, eyes bright. When Eli stepped out, the dog rose, tail wagging, and pressed his head into Eli's hand. "Good work, soldier," Eli whispered. A reporter tried to push through the crowd, shouting questions. "Mr. Carter, what will you do with the land now?" Eli paused, glancing at the distant hills. The wind carried the scent of cold earth and promise. "I'll keep it the way it was meant to be," he said quietly. "Alive." Clara joined him on the steps, folding her arms against the wind. "You know," she said, "the EPA's planning to designate this entire basin as a protected watershed. They'll need someone local to help manage it." Eli smiled faintly. "You offering me a job?" "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'm asking for one." They both laughed, the kind of laughter that comes after too many nights spent waiting for bad news. As the courthouse emptied, the last rays of sunlight spilled across the street, painting everything gold. Boone barked once, a sound of victory and warning all at once. Eli looked back toward the building, then to the truck, then to the long road home. He didn't feel like a man who'd won something. He felt like a man who'd finally stopped losing. And somewhere deep beneath Sweetgrass, the aquifer ran steady and pure. Water remembering the hands that had chosen to protect it, and the promise Silas had written in ink that would never fade. Spring arrived late that year. The mountains still wore their white crowns, but down in Sweetgrass County, the fields had begun to breathe again. New shoots of barley shimmered pale green under the wind, and the air smelled of thawed earth and wet wood. For the first time in months, the land felt alive, not just surviving, but remembering. Eli Carter stood by the new barn, rebuilt from the bones of the old one. The timbers were clean pine, the walls painted a gentle gray. Above the door, the restored sign hung proudly once again, Heartland Field. He ran a hand over the letters, the grain of the wood warm beneath his palm. Boone sat beside him, tail brushing the ground, eyes half closed in the sun. The dog was older now, his muzzle flecked with white, his movement slower, but his gaze still burned bright, steady as the horizon itself. "Feels different, doesn't it, boy?" Eli said softly. Boone gave a quiet huff, almost a sigh. It had been 3 months since the county ruling. Burke Energy's licenses were revoked, their equipment seized, their CEO under federal investigation. The story had made state headlines for a week, but like most news, it faded when the next storm came. For the people of Sweetgrass, though, things had changed. The EPA had officially designated Heartland Field and its surrounding acreage as part of the Sweetgrass Sustainable Watershed Reserve, ensuring permanent protection for the aquifer. And because of Clara Reynolds's petition and her refusal to back down, the land would also serve a second purpose, a teaching center. A week earlier, volunteers had hung a new sign on the old grain shed, Sweetgrass, Center for Sustainable Agriculture, in honor of Silas Carter. Eli walked through the barnyard, passing young volunteers hammering planks, painting fences and planting seedlings in tidy rows. Most of them were veterans like him, men and women still learning how to live quietly after years of noise. At the far end of the field, Clara stood beside a group of school children kneeling in the soil, showing them how to test pH levels with a drop of dye. The wind tugged at her hair, pulling a loose strand across her cheek. When she saw Eli, she waved. "We're making scientists out of them," she called. He smiled. "Careful, you'll put me out of work." "You already have a job," she said, walking toward him. "Caretaker, farmer, historian, and, apparently, local legend." He chuckled. "Don't forget part-time mechanic." Clara leaned on the fence beside him, her eyes on the children. They'll remember this place, even if they don't know all the history. They'll feel it. Eli nodded slowly. "The land remembers for us." Boone barked once, sharp but not alarmed. He had spotted Caleb Morgan, the wiry neighbor with oil-stained hands and a permanent grin, driving up the dirt road in his old pickup. In the back were wooden crates filled with donated tools and saplings. "Morning, folks," Caleb called. "Brought some apple trees from my cousin's nursery. Figured the Carter place could use some shade again." Eli smiled. "That's good of you." Caleb shrugged. "Your granddad gave me a job when nobody else would. I figure I still owe this land something." He lifted one of the saplings from the truck bed. Thin, trembling, full of promise. Boone sniffed it approvingly, tail wagging. They planted the first tree together beside the old well, the same one Silas had dug half a century ago. As they worked, Eli could smell the damp earth and the faint mineral tang of water rising close beneath the surface. "Still flowing strong," Caleb said, wiping his hands. Eli nodded. "Yeah, it always will." That evening, when the volunteers had gone and the fields had turned gold under the setting sun, Eli sat on the porch steps with a glass of iced tea. Boone lay stretched beside him, one paw resting over Eli's boot. Clara joined him, dropping into the chair nearby. She handed him an envelope, official, stamped with the EPA seal. "What's this?" he asked. "Final notice," she said. "The federal government's approved the Carter Covenant as a national conservation record. It's permanent now, Eli. No one can ever drill or build here again." He turned the envelope over in his hands but didn't open it. "You did this," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Your grandfather did. You just carried the torch." Eli looked out over the land, the barn, the young trees, the quiet hills catching the last light of the day. "Funny thing," he said. "I came back here thinking I'd inherited dirt. Turns out it was something alive." Clara smiled. "The best legacies are." The sun dipped lower. The world turned soft and amber. Somewhere, water gurgled faintly in the irrigation channels. A quiet, patient song that had been running beneath their feet the whole time. Eli closed his eyes and listened. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice again. "The land provides, if you protect it." Boone lifted his head and looked toward the horizon where the sweetgrass ridge met the fading light. The dog's ears twitched. Not at danger, but at something older, deeper, like the sound of life itself continuing. "Go on," Eli whispered. Boone trotted a few steps into the field, then stopped, standing tall among the barley. For a moment, he looked exactly like he had years ago, strong, sharp, eternal. When he turned back, his eyes met Eli's, and something passed between them that didn't need words. Later that night, when the last of the light was gone and the stars had taken the sky, Eli walked out into Heartland Field. The air was cool, carrying the scent of spring rain on the horizon. He knelt and placed his palm flat against the soil, the same way he had the day he first returned. Beneath his hand, the ground pulsed faintly, as if breathing. "Still here," he murmured. He thought of the battles he'd fought, in foreign deserts and dusty courtrooms, in the quiet dark of his own heart. And through it all, this land had been waiting. Steady, patient, forgiving. Boone came and sat beside him, leaning gently against his side. "Yeah," Eli whispered, smiling faintly. "We're home." A breeze rose, carrying the scent of the barley and the whisper of running water beneath. It moved through the fields like a memory rediscovered, soft, endless, alive. Eli looked up at the stars, the same ones his grandfather once used to navigate night harvests. The land, the water, the sky, all of it connected, all of it remembering. And in that moment, with Boone beside him and the soil cool under his palm, Eli finally understood what Silas had meant all those years ago. The heart of the land doesn't just rest beneath the soil, it beats through every hand that chooses to protect it. The water ran quietly below, carrying their story forward, not an ending, but a continuation. Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't flashes of light from the heavens. They're quiet things that happen in the soil beneath our feet, in the hearts that choose kindness, in the hands that protect instead of take. Eli thought he was just saving a piece of land. But maybe God was teaching him, and all of us, how to remember what truly matters. May His grace protect every soul that chooses to care, every heart that still believes in goodness, and every home that stands in the light. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you love. Leave your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, love, and the small miracles God sends our way.